In this video, I'm going to show you how to convert this page layout here that was done in the old floated elements technique, and then rebuild the whole thing with Flexbox. So I'm going to be using this guide a lot. We're referencing, all the different Flexbox properties and things like that. So this is something you should definitely make a note of and bookmark because this is something you'll end up referencing a lot. So the first thing you should do, if you've worked with Flexbox before, or if you've never really worked with it before, and you're just kind of curious about it, the first thing you should probably do before start coding with Flexbox is pretty much forget everything you know or understand about floats, because that's a very different concept from Flexbox. And I think a lot of folks that first jump into Flexbox start confuse the two. So in this layout right now, before we even work on it, this is all built in floats. So you have a container over here, you have a container over there, and this is floated to the left, and this is floated to the right. And that's what you're familiar with. One thing to note, this container does include a clear fix. So one of the problems with floating elements, if I save that and refresh this page right here, you'll see that the container just collapsed. You see, so you have to do a lot of this sort of like fixes, like a clear fix, and I'll refresh the page again, which will prevent the container from collapsing. You have to have these workarounds. It's really not an effective way of laying out a page. However, having said that, using floated elements is still appropriate for certain scenarios. So if you had, let's say, a photograph inside of here, you could do a float right to the photograph, and the text would wrap around it. That's an appropriate way to use floats. But in reality, floats is not really a good method in laying out a web page. Flexbox is much better. If just to give you some quick background, when initially website design came about, a lot of folks were designing websites with tables, and they were laying out content using tables. And unfortunately, tables are not really made for website layouts. They're designed for tabular content. So, which is not to say just because people were using it for tables, you shouldn't use tables. In the past, you shouldn't use them anymore at all. You should for tabular content. That's what it's designed for. And like floats, it's really designed for floating pictures and have like text wrap around. It's not really an ideal solution for laying out a website. So anyhow, so Flexbox is the way to go. So like I said, just forget everything you know about floats and let's just focus on working with Flexbox. So, and Flexbox is also an ideal solution for responsive layouts, and this is what we're going to tackle in this video here as well. So if you look at this layout, this is in floats. So if I kind of squeeze it here, everything kind of stays really squished like that, so no good. So we need to figure out a way to rejigger this so that this is done with floats. And by the way, before I continue, another common thing with floats is that whenever you have two containers side by side, you have this sort of gap over here. So this is a real problem with floated elements, and this is where Flexbox really shines and takes care of things like this for us. Particularly when you start to resize things, this gap gets larger and larger. So anyway, so let's go ahead and do that now. So the first thing I want to do is hop over to my CSS style sheet here. And what I'm really going to do is just kind of browse through and delete all instances of floats. I'm going to get rid of that float. Let's see here. I'm going to get rid of this float over here. Gone. And if I save this, I think this is all we have. Let's refresh. Yes, so now there's no floats, and what we have is just containers stacking one on top of another. This container here, if I use my inspector, let's go ahead and do that now. I'll resize this. Okay, looks like there's an error here. Oh, that's fine because we don't have a modernizer here. So let's go ahead and remove it from here. We don't need it for this project. Save that, refresh the page again. Let's use the inspector. Alrighty, so here what we have, so the inspector tool is really your go-to tool for, building websites. It really gives you a lot of information in terms of what's happening, what's going on, why is this container and font doing what it's doing. So if I mouse over this copy container here, class copy, I could see that has a padding of 15 pixels, has a width of 70%. If I scroll down to the bottom here, this sidebar container, the side here, I see that it has 28% here. So that's how we know that they could be side by side because this room here has space for about 30%. So this is a 28%, so that's fine. So what we want to achieve now is get this sidebar to show up over here. So how do we go about doing that? So the way Flexbox works, it's a container items relationship. In other words, you have a container and whatever items inside of it become Flexbox items and they can react accordingly. So what does that mean exactly? The best way to show you is in this example here. So if I use this inspector again, I see this content here, this class section with the class of content contains the copy and the site sidebar. So these two divs here, right? So if I select this content, this would be an ideal solution to become a Flexbox container, which would then make this copy class and this site sidebar class are Flexbox items. So again, it's that container items relationship we're talking about, okay? So I'm going to look for content. Here it is over here. So what we want to do is make this our display flex. Now, what are our options for display? We could do display none, which hides it essentially. We could do display block, which is a block level item, which means the container will take the full width that it's in. And we have display inline block, which inherits some of the instances from blocks. So you could do like things like padding and margin, where if you have an inline item, it no longer reacts to padding and margin the same way. But in our case, we don't want any of those things. We want display flex. So as soon as I save this, this content container has become a Flexbox container. So if I refresh this page, here we are. Here's a sidebar comes to the top. So the first thing that happens when you do a Flexbox, when you initiate display flex, is that all the contents inside the direct child descendants become Flexbox items. Now I'm talking about the direct child descendants. So if I use the inspector here, and if you look at each of these widgets inside the sidebar are not Flexbox items. The sidebar is a Flexbox item, copy is a Flexbox item, content is the Flexbox container, but all the elements inside these widgets are not Flexbox items. In order to make these Flexbox items, you also have to target site sidebar and make that display flex. As soon as you do that, which we'll do in a little bit, these will become Flexbox items. So at this moment, the only thing we've done is targeted the content container, which has this copy over here on the left-hand side and this sidebar on the right-hand side, and all we did is initiate Flexbox. So now this is now a Flexbox. Let me use the inspector again. The copy portion, which is this content on the left-hand side, is now our Flexbox item, and then our site sidebar here is going to be our Flexbox item as well. That's the only thing that will be affected by Flexbox, nothing inside of it. Okay, let's move on. See this little gap over here? There's no gap over here. So another cool feature we can take advantage of is something called justify content with Flexbox. If I open this guide over here, just to review, so this guide, the way they Chris Corey at CSS Tricks presented it is that the purple boxes here are your Flexbox containers, and your sort of beige color here are your Flexbox items. Now that's important because all these different CSS properties apply to different things. So either you're targeting the container or you're targeting the items inside the container. And so you have to use different CSS properties. What I want to do right now is use something called justify content. Let's look for that now. Here it is right over here, justify content. So let's go ahead and take advantage of justify content so we can achieve where this container will be shifted to the right and this container will be shifted to the left. Rather, this item will be shifted to the left and then this will be to the right. Okay, so what we want to do is use this thing called space between. And this is in the purple container. So I'm going to go back over here and let's do that now. Let's do justify content space between. Save that. I'll refresh this page now. There we go. So there's a little gap over here now, if you see that. So that kind of like essentially what it did, it took this container here and shifted it to the left, and took this container, shifted it, rather this item shifted it to the right and this item to the left. And so that way you have a little bit of a gap over here. So that looks fine for now. I mean, you could do space around. So essentially, you have the flexibility to arrange these however you like. You could even do flex center if you wanted to. Let's do that now. And if I refresh this page, both of these now connect, but now they're both centered. So you have a lot of flexibility in terms of what you could do with Flexbox. So okay, I'm going to go back to just space between. Let's do that. And let's refresh the page. And one thing I noticed, let me just use the inspector here to see what's going on. This copy is 70%, and then this is, let me just try something. Oops. Got it. So let's do this. Let's go ahead, because I want to make this really noticeable. So let's go ahead and try and do this. Let's make this copy, which is this left-hand side item here. Let's make that 65%. And I want the side sidebar. I'm going to scroll down a little bit here. Let's make this 25%. Save this. Let's refresh the page. There we are. So it's a little bit more noticeable so you can see the differences here. So this is where Flexbox really shines. It kind of centered both containers inside the container that it's in, and it moved this one to the left and moved this one to the right. So you have a lot of control like that. So now here's what we have. Okay, pretty good. But what we really want to do is have these containers sort of stack on top of one another right now because see how narrow this is getting? It's not looking really good. So we can use our inspector to do that. So if I use the inspector and I resize this browser, now look right over here in the top right hand corner of the browser and watch as I resize the browser. You see those numbers there at the top right hand corner? See, that's your width. So I'm thinking like around 800 pixels. We want it to change. We want to overwrite these styles. We want to change the width here. So if I come down to the bottom where the media query section is for me here, I'm going to create a new media query. I'm going to do at media screen, and I want to do a max width of 800 pixels. So at this breakpoint, if you will, so anything below 800 pixels, we want it to be different. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, cool. So we have our copy container, which is now 65%, and we have our sidebar, which is 25%. So what if we make these things 100% and 100%? Won't they stack? Not quite, but let's go ahead and try and do that, and let's see what happens. So if I target copy and I target sidebar, so now I target both of these, and I'm changing their width to 100%. I'll save that right now. I'm going to refresh the page. And as I'm going to pull up the inspector again. And if you look over in the right-hand corner, as I resize, I'm going to get down to 800 pixels. Okay, get in there, and there we are, 800 pixels. Now, both of these containers just became 100%. However, they're not stacking. So how do we get them to stack? So the thing with Flexbox is you really need to specify in the Flexbox container, you need to tell it, hey, I want you to stack on top of one another. And the way you do that is you take advantage of something called wrap. This is this example right here. And because it's in this purple container here, you know that this is something you need to apply to the Flexbox container. So our Flexbox container is really something called content. So what we need to do, let's scroll down to the media query. So at this breakpoint, 800 pixels and below, we want to target the content, get rid of this extra period, and what we want to do is flex wrap equals wrap. So what we're doing is, so at 800 or below, we want the content, which is our Flexbox container, to also have a new property called flex wrap. We want it to be wrapped so that they stack on one another. We're also changing the copy from 60%, 25% sidebar copy to be 100%. So both of those left-hand side and the right-hand side will be both 100%. So they'll take up the full width. So if I refresh this page now and then try that again, there we are. So now we're stacking one another. That's pretty cool. So that's really easy way to sort of work with Flexbox, arrange the content. You don't have to do clear fix anymore. So if I come back over here and get rid of this clear fix adjustment, save that, refresh the page. There we go. So it looks like clear fix was giving me some unpredictable results. Perfect. So yeah, be sure to remove clear fix because that really is something designed for floats. Perfect. So as you can see, this gap now is more prominent. So let's go ahead and jump back over here. I just want to let's see here, scroll to the top. Perfect. So let's do 70% on here, and I want in the sites. This is the copy container, if you will, and then the site sidebar. I'm going to switch it to let's do 28%. And let's refresh this page. There we are. So now we have more predictable results. So now you have an even padding over here, even padding over here. So again, any floats that you have in your current projects, then you want to switch to Flexbox, get rid of the floats and get rid of ClearFix. So it has some unpredictable results. Very cool. So now that we have this container, if I go ahead and squeeze it here, you see these items stack on one another. So like if you're on an iPad or a narrow device, things like that, it'll stack. But this could be better. So how can we adjust for this? So if we look back in our code over here, in fact, let's just do this with the inspector just so it's easier to see. I'm inspecting this item. So this is a widget, this is a widget, this is a widget. So by default, these are div containers, which means that they have display block. Remember I was talking about display inline block, things like that. So for instance, if I switch display inline, see what happens? They all sort of stack side by side. Well, that doesn't look really clean. And you don't really have that much control here. So I'm going to get rid of that as well. So right now they're display blocks. What I want to do, ideally, is I want to target this site sidebar and also make this display flex, which would make these widgets our Flexbox items. So let's go ahead and do that now. So this is site sidebar. Now, I want to do this not at the default state. I really want to do this at 800 and below, because see this gap here? We don't like this gap. There's got to be a way to address this. It's fine over here because it's in the sidebar and it's narrow, but over here it's not so good. So how do we do that? So in here, in our media query, so which means if the viewport is 800 or below, we want it to we want to include these specific styles. So I want to target the sidebar, and we want to make it display flex. So watch what's going to happen as soon as we do that. Save that, refresh this page. There you go. All these widgets now became side by side. Notice how they're not wrapping on top of one another? It's because we don't have Flex wrap. So we need to do that as well. So let's go ahead and do that now. So let's go Flex wrap. Save that. Now I'm going to refresh this page. Now they're wrapping. And they're wrapping intelligently because Flexbox knows this takes 250 pixels width and this takes 250 pixels width. So we're not actually specifying any widths over here. Flexbox is doing this on its own. So that's cool. And the thing I want to do is do justify content, just like we did with the sidebar. So let's do that now. Justify content, space between, save. Let's refresh the page. There we are. So as you can see, here's our desktop version. And as we get a little bit narrower, you look over here. Now these are side by side. So it's a lot better than before, right? So there's no, gaps, things like that. What you also can do if you wanted to, if you look at the inspector here, and each of these widgets, the math doesn't quite add up. So that's why there's this little gap over here. It's, not so good. So if you wanted to, is target each of these widgets and give it a specific width. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, just to make things a little bit cleaner. So I'm going to target a widget because we have 4 of them here. I'm going to do width with a 25%. And also give it a little bit of padding. And I'm doing this in pixels just as an example, but of course you can use rams, percentages, things like that. So I'm going to let's do 15 pixels. Let's save that. Let's refresh the page. Let's see what we're missing. 25, 25. Oh, sorry. This, instead of 25 pixels, I want to do 50. Or rather, instead of 25%, I want to do 50%. And there we are. So a little bit more even, a little bit more consistent. And as we continue to resize this, looks pretty good. But you know what? We're getting really tight over here. And this is no longer looking too good because now it's getting really squished, if you will. So what I want to do is that it's fine over here, but I'll pull up the inspector again. If you look at this browser again, I would resize this. I would say maybe around here, which is like 550 pixels and below. We really want these to stack on one another. Let's go ahead and do that now. So let's go ahead and make a new media query. At media, screen, and let's do a max width. Let's say 600 pixels. And inside of here, what we want to do is target this widget and overwrite these styles here. Let's do width 100%. Let's go ahead and save that. And let's refresh the page. There we are. Looks pretty good. And I'm going to use the inspector again. See, these widgets are 100%, but the pictures inside, their width is only 250 pixels. So if you wanted to, just for aesthetic purposes, you could do text align equals center. There we are. So that looks pretty good. So already we've worked with Flexbox to arrange our content more with more control and have the breakpoints be, a lot nicer than before without having these awkward gaps and things like that. Pretty cool. I want to show you another cool feature of Flexbox. In fact, let's go ahead and add some content to the widget so we can see what they are. So I'm going to do widget 1. So this is pretty cool. Okay, I just want to mark these up so we see what they are. Save that, refresh the page. So this is widget 1, widget 2, 3, and 4. So the way you can work with Flexbox is a really cool feature called Order. So if I go back over here and look up Order, right over here, it gives us the ability to control each of the Flexbox items. As you can see in this guide over here, it's in the beige container, which means that these CSS properties, when they apply to the Flexbox items. Okay, so our Flexbox items are these widget containers right over here. Widget widget, widget, and widget. But this side sidebar is our Flexbox container. And this container is only becomes active at 800 and below. Before that, it's not a Flexbox item, as you can see right over here. Cool. So what I want to do is when we get to this point, let's say this is an iPad, and let's say that you want to have item 4 become the first thing that people see instead of item 1, you have that kind of control. So let's go see what that looks like in action. So one thing we have to do is target each of these individually, okay? So right around here in this 800 and below, I'm going to use something called nth child selector. So let's go ahead and I'll show you what that is. So I'm targeting widget nth child 1, which is the first one, and I'm going to specify an order of 1. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, 2, 3, 4. Let's go ahead and update the numbers. Make sure you update all of them. 4. Save. Now, nothing's going to change. If I refresh this page, it's the same order. However, if you wanted to rearrange this so we have more control over what's going on over here. So let's say we want to have the 4th item be at the top and then the first item to be at the bottom. So you literally target this, change its order to 4, and then change the last one to 1. Save this. Let's refresh the page. Boom. Widget 4 is now the first one, and widget 1 is now the last one. Okay, that looks good. Let's say at this scenario, this is what you wanted to present because you have some content over here that you wanted it to be up front. But let's say you get down to this stage here and you go, well, that was made a lot of sense on the iPad, but on an iPhone, not so good. I want this widget 4 to be maybe over here or change the order. Well, you can do that again. So I'm going to copy all of these over here, and inside this media query, 600 and below, we're going to change the order again. So now we want the first item to be the third item. The second one, we want it to be the first item. The third one, we want it to be the second one. And the fourth one, let's just go ahead and make it the fourth one. Save, refresh. There you go. So now our widget order just changed. So now you can imagine is that whatever content you have, you want to present it differently on an iPad. You want to present it in a different order on an iPhone, on a smartphone, on a tablet, whatever it may be. Flexbox give you that option. So I've done nothing with the code over here where I didn't copy or rearrange anything. I didn't have to do anything like that. Flexbox did all of that for me. So if I now squeeze this, you see how this rearranged, and then furthermore, there you go. So you have a lot of control in terms of what you can do with Flexbox. Now, there are a lot of different scenarios in Flexbox. So what you need to do is understand the relationship between Flexbox as the container or Flexbox as the item and apply the appropriate properties for your given scenario. So remember, you can target as many containers as you like. And the way the Flexbox relationship works is that as soon as you target a container and make it display Flex, all the direct descendants become Flexbox items, but just the first level. So in other words, again, looking back at this, if I use the inspector, here's your sidebar, right? This is your Flexbox container. I'm going to squeeze it over here. There we go. This is your Flexbox container. If I open this up here and you see the widget, that's your Flexbox item. Now, this is not a Flexbox item. Your H1 inside is not a Flexbox item. The image is not a Flexbox item. Only the direct child descendant is. So just keep that in mind. And then that way you can apply the appropriate CSS properties to it. So again, if you use this guide, very useful. You have the purple container is all the properties you would apply into for a Flexbox container. So it could be change the direction, it could be row, it could be or row reverse or column reverse, whatever the situation may be. If you want the Flexbox items inside the Flexbox container to stack, you'll have to use Flexbox flex dash wrap and utilize wrap or no wrap if you really want to specify, hey, I don't want this to wrap ever. Or you could do wrap reverse. So it's up to you in your scenario. Every scenario will be different. You could justify the content. So maybe in the past, the way you can sort of compare this to you did float left, float right. Well, instead of bother with all that stuff, you just target one of these and decide which one is more appropriate for your scenario. You can align items. So you can make them center. So I'll show you here. Let's go ahead and look at this scenario. Let's say for instance, oops. Let's say, for instance, you want to center these on the page here. So let's go ahead and look at this. How do we maybe do that? And let's see here, I want to do aligned items. So you see this is in a purple container. So what we want to target is the site sidebar, which is right over here. And that's because see it's purple, so we need to target the Flexbox container. So there it is here. Let's do align dash items, and let's do center. And let's save that. And let's refresh the page. There we go. So now they're centered on the page. So again, it just depends on your layout and the needs of the project. But here you can see all the examples. What does center do? What does flex start do? What does flex end do? You just kind of browse there and decide, oh, this would solve this scenario and this would solve this other scenario. But just understand the relationship between Flexbox. Very key. Cool.